That's why we'll be supporting this bill.
I call Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to take a call on the Local Electoral Amendment Bill number 2, and I think the John Banks Bill would be a very good title for it. And the Green Party will be supporting this bill because it was the so-called anonymous donations from Mr Kim.com and Sky City to Mr John Banks in the 2010 Auckland mayoral campaign, where Mr Banks allegedly cannot recall the donor's identity, that highlighted significant gaps in our electoral law. And the Act requires that candidates declare any donation over $1,000 if they know the source. Yet Mr Banks's convenient memory lapses allowed him to circumvent this. So that's why the Green Party is giving qualified support to this bill, because it certainly takes some steps to improve the law and to increase the transparency of local elections and candidates' disclosure, recording and reporting of donations. But we will be looking to achieve some significant changes at Select Committee to strengthen the bill, particularly so that it better regulates electoral financing. And the provisions in my colleague Denise Roach's private members bill, which is currently in the ballot, are wider in scope, and they would be a very good guide to some of the changes that the Green Party is seeking, because they put a cap on donations by any person or group of $5,000. They put a ban, the bill puts a ban on overseas donations. It would regulate third-party spending, and it would establish a pecuniary interest register for members of local authorities. Those are things that we don't see in this bill. But, Mr Speaker, there are some useful changes in this bill, and one of those is ensuring that donations are clearly considered an electoral expense. And it's also a good change that anyone who works with the candidate and knows the identity of a donor who gives more than $1,500 must declare the identity of that donor to the candidate. This should certainly help Mr Banks with his memory lapses. And the bill also creates a disincentive against anonymous donations, because where a purported anonymous campaign donation to a candidate exceeds $1,500, the excess has to be given to the local authority's electoral officer. And another improvement in the bill is that the return of the donations has to have more detail in it, and also it does increase the disclosure, reporting and recording obligations, and introduces some penalties for non-compliance. All good things. The bill also makes some wider changes, which I'd like to comment on briefly, and that's to change the balance between fair and effective representation, and to increase the criteria where the local authority can adjust the boundaries of wards or constituencies and not have to comply with the 10% plus or minus rule, the fair representation rule. And this is so that there is more of an emphasis on fair representation, and some of the two circumstances where that could occur are where there would be communities of interest that would be separated, or two very different communities would be joined in the same ward. And those changes were certainly recommended by the Local Government Commission in its 2008 review of the Local Electoral Act 2001. And, Mr Speaker, the Commission in its review thought that it was very important to ensure that the representation arrangements in local government were configured so that the ward and constituency boundaries went along the lines of recognising communities of interest, and that electors were therefore able to identify with the area concerned, and that could assist voter participation in elections. And the Commission also thought that this flexibility was needed to promote fair representation, so that the boundaries would ensure that there was convenient access to local authority services, and that it would avoid grouping communities which had little in common. So, Mr Speaker, it's puzzling that on the one hand, the government in this bill is promoting fair representation, yet with its proposals in the Local Government Act 2002 Amendment Bill and the government's push to supersise councils around New Zealand and its belief that big is better, cuts right across this whole principle of local government being about local democracy and local councils representing local communities, which the Local Government Commission thought was important in its review of the local electoral legislation. Because it's the amalgamation provisions in the Local Government Amendment Bill which will make it so much easier to push through supersized councils, regardless of whether communities that are adjacent to each other want to be lumped together, because they are going to be denied the right to have a poll on those amalgamation proposals unless they get a petition.
Order. The member is far outside the scope of the bill. This is about...
Come back, Mr Speaker.
Yes, well...
So the Green Party also has concerns about the new powers in clause 21 of the bill, because that would allow the Minister of Local Government, through an order in Council, to adjourn elections. Now, the current Local Electoral Act allows the electoral officer to adjourn the close of voting for up to 14 days in certain situations, such as a natural disaster. But the new bill allows the postponing of the whole election for up to 6 weeks, and that can be rolled over. And given, Mr Speaker, that this government has postponed elections for Environment Canterbury until 2016, we are not confident that the Minister will not abuse this power and will not use it to postpone elections. So given that this government doesn't trust Cantabrians to elect councillors at the Regional Council who provide stable, effective and efficient government, because it's got a one-eyed focus on maximising irrigation on the Canterbury Plains, what confidence is there that the government won't use the provisions in this bill to postpone elections in other circumstances? So, Mr Speaker, we will be supporting the bill, but we want to see it strengthened in Select Committee, and we have reservations about some of the provisions in it.
Mr Speaker.
Dr Cam Calder.
It's a pleasure to rise, Mr Speaker, and take